going into a very serious and urgent situation right now on the African continent. We're speaking human trafficking, and in particular, human trafficking to the sex trade. Human trafficking is a serious problem on the continent and is a major region of origin for victims who are trafficked into other parts of the world, such as Western Europe and the Middle East. But that's not where it ends. Domestic and intra-regional trafficking is also really common on the continent, with a large number of those victimized being women and children trafficked for sexual slavery. We're unpacking this conversation today, looking at the sex trafficking trade here on the African continent, speaking to an NGO, Brave to Love. They have a mission to rescue, rehabilitate, restore, and reintegrate victims and survivors of sex trafficking and the sex trade. Joined in studio is a founder of Brave to Love, Emma Van De Walt. But we also have on the line with us Anonymous. Anonymous joins us on the line to tell us her story of being kidnapped and possibly being sex trafficked. Well, almost being sex trafficked. She was kidnapped and later on was able to escape after a week of being reported missing. Yeah. We're going to start with you here, Emma. Emma, thank you so much for joining us and for coming through to Channel Africa.
Thank you. It's wonderful being here. Thanks for addressing the topic. It's very important.
It is a really, really important topic, and one that's not spoken about as usual as it should be. Especially now, we're seeing a lot of reports of human trafficking, kidnapping. In fact, almost every week in South Africa, a news update comes of someone who has been kidnapped. Well, not all kidnappings go the same way or end in the same way, but human trafficking shows to be growing on the continent.
Correct. And I think when we look at trafficking, we do know it's a physical entrapment, it's slavery. But one thing that we need to understand is trafficking, human trafficking in the sex trade can also be a mental entrapment and psychological entrapment. So when these traffickers target it's a very psychological process that needs to be understood, because a trafficker will lure in their victim by building trust, promising them financial gain, promising them the world. And that's when they start forming their trust, and that's when that psychological entrapment can start happening. So, and when we talk about the sex trade, we do talk about narcotics, drug addiction that plays a role in that entrapment, which keeps that victim under the abuse repetitively because they are addicted to drugs. And also we talk about a concept called trauma bonding, where a victim, and this is where we see even in domestic violence cases against women, where the victim will show empathy towards the trafficker. They will start protecting the trafficker because of that trauma bonding. We call it Stockholm syndrome, but also it's called trauma bonding, where the victim will bond with it.
How does that actually work? That sounds very like a technique that many of us don't know about. Could you give us a little bit of more detail of what's the system and how people actually achieve that?
Correct. So we know 80% of human trafficking happens in the commercial sex trade. Firstly, in South Africa, it might even be more. But firstly, these traffickers, these pimps that are running the commercial sex trade in South Africa, lure in. We've had tremendous amount of teenage girls that do go out. The community thinks they run away from their home, they start getting into drugs, and then these traffickers are in the clubs, they are in the bars, and then they start targeting. And that grooming process is when they start bonding as a boyfriend, as they start luring them in or promising them jobs, and that's when the entrapment start happening. It's a very subtle process that the victim, we've rescued victims that didn't even realize that they are trafficked. But when the cases actually comes to forth, we realize they were abused, they were a victim.
There's a notion, or I guess what we can imagine human trafficking to be. And it comes from us watching movies and, all these old TV series that, first of all, you have to be kidnapped, you have to be taken by force and put somewhere, and then you're shipped into a container. And, that's what the movies have shown us. And so that's the image we have of what human trafficking is. But usually when we walk around CBDs or busy areas, especially a lot of commercial areas around cities, in places like Johannesburg and other big cities, you see, ladies, they call them ladies of the night or prostitutes, and they're just standing there doing their thing. And we sort of don't include them in what we call human trafficking. We think everything is a choice, but that's not what human trafficking looks like in 2024, is it?
So let me tell you what happens to a woman walking on or living on the streets or busy with prostitution.
Yeah.
If she's trafficked, and many of these cases, these women are in prostitution already, and it's extremely dangerous and abusive place to find herself in any way.
Yeah.
So remember, currently, what do you think is the cost of a lady selling herself on the streets of Joburg CBD?
10 rand, 20 rand?
Well, between 40, 60, 100 rand. I mean, that's her worth. So these traffickers are, so when it comes to trafficking, she does not get the money. That money, the client comes in, these pimps are watching them. They've got guys on the street that will manage the money, and that money goes directly to the pimp, and that's when we start identifying trafficking. So a lot of times he says, no, I'm paying for the flat, I'm paying for your hair, I'm paying for this, I'm paying for your drugs. But that's when the trafficking starts, when there's the amount of money. And the scary thing is, they are moving these women, so they're from one brothel to another brothel.
Wow.
So and what the women don't always realize, there's a transaction that took place. One of our ladies said to me, Emma, you know how much they sold me for? They sold me for 1,500 from one pimp to another, like a bag of potatoes. That's what her worth was. 1,500 for a human being.
You know, the tricky part when we speak about this, Emma, is the fact that, have these women and men lost their agency to actually respond to the situation that they find themselves in? Because one thing that we do as society will say, well, they put themselves there, they deserve to be there. Because what happens with trafficking and sex work, it's an invisible reality. It's in front of us, but it's not really there. We don't admit it's there, but it's actually there. And then we give these people who have been pimped out or who have been trafficked the responsibility for their circumstances. And isn't that where the trick is around us not understanding the modern way of trafficking?
Correct, exactly that. Because we have desensitized ourselves. And I think a lot of times, even these traffickers desensitized because a human being is how much worth is a human being if they can sell human beings. But if we look at the Human Traffic Act, it's very important to understand. First, he speaks about the vulnerabilities of the person. So poverty, lack of education, disability, narcotics, drug addiction is one of the vulnerabilities that are mentioned in the Human Traffic Act. So these are the vulnerabilities that we see that causes a person to be enslaved, where they feel that they do not have an exit out of that. And that's a lot of times. These women, you ask, why do these women not run to the local police station? Because many times, unfortunately, they do go to the police station. The police tell, no, but you're a mahosha, you're a prostitute. You cannot get help. So that's unfortunately the sad part. And they do reach out. So this is why community is so important. Why, in civil society plays a role in helping to identify and training for law enforcement and your home affairs and your TNPD, JNPD. Why it's so important, because they do know where these brothels are. And this is why South Africa need to fight harder to shut down these brothels, because women and underage girls are being trafficked in these brothels. That's the crime scene, is brothels.
Well, sometimes, especially now, it's still International Women's Month. And I was actually relaying a story this week, and I was telling Benjamin and a few of my colleagues of sometimes it seems like women are shouting and saying, oh my goodness, it's so dangerous to be a woman. And it feels like an exaggeration until you see it happen to you. And, unfortunately, it's very, very easy for those circumstances to happen these days. I will. Sure. And, just this week, was it this past weekend? I was with my mother and I just picked her up from her own place and we were going to mine, and we stopped by a garage close to my place. I go out trying to buy a few goods and a guy approached me. It's like, and there was, it's one of those places where people can drink. So a guy approached me. There's a lot of men there. And, I was just like, okay, just hi, how are you? I'm all right. I'm buying what I'm buying and I'm leaving. And he followed us in his car behind us all the way to my place. So in the back of my mind, I can see this car following us and I'm thinking, okay, my place, my apartment is access controlled. So I'll just click my control and go inside and that's the whole thing will end. But the guy continues to follow us. I get to my place. I open with my remote, my car, I drive in with my car, and I'm with my mom in the car, and the gate closes. So I'm like, okay, that's the end of that. And I park my car in my bay, which I can see the gate from my parking bay. And the guy drives in. I don't know if the security let him in or if another car let him in, but he's in. And I don't know this guy from above, and he drives around the entire complex. We can see from in the car looking and searching for us. He even drives past us, and I don't know how, but fortunately, we were hiding in the car. And when he was driving towards us, I would say to Mama, you know what? It's time for me to confront this guy and just, put him off. And I said, no, let's just hide. So I sit, we sit low in the car. Imagine in my own home, in my own car, hiding from a stranger, and he drives past us and drives back again. So he doesn't recognize my car and he leaves. But that was a scary situation to be in, that women are in on a daily basis on the African continent. And who knows what was going to happen. And for some, mine was, a happy ending, because I then walked into my place, complained with my apartment trustees and all of that. So there are processes taking place about that particular incident, but many others find themselves in places where they can be taken from those situations. So we're speaking about human trafficking today, and particularly sex trafficking. It happens more often than you think. It's happening in every community, and it could even happen to you, especially if you are a woman or a child living on the continent. We still have in studio with us from Brave to Love, an NGO that rescues, rehabilitates and restores victims and survivors of sex trafficking, Emma Van De Walt. But we also have Anonymous on the line, which I'll be bringing into the conversation right now. Anonymous, thank you so much for joining us. Good morning.
Join you, Palesa and Benjamin. Thank you that somebody is really talking about this sensitive issue. This issue is so major. It's so major that it happens every second.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Anonymous, let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, Palesa was citing something that happened to her, someone actually approaching her at a very neutral public place to a point where they were following her. But these incidences happen to women quite often and a lot. Can you relate your scenario of what happened when you were kidnapped? And I'm sorry that this happened to you, and thank you for being brave to speak to us about it.
That's not a problem, Benjamin. Now, I was visiting my sister, and usually, like when you go around trying that point where the taxis always pass, they know that this time the taxis will actually be slow. So that time.
Anonymous, are you there? Okay.
Anonymous, we are struggling a little bit with your line. Just give us a second. We're going to redial you and make sure that we can hear your story clearly. So stay on the line. We will get you back on a better line so we can hear your story clearly.
And we were just about to speak to Anonymous. We're trying to get that line sorted. But in the meanwhile, let's continue with our guest, Emma Van De Walt, who is the founder of the NGO Brave to Love, which rescues and rehabilitates, restores and reintegrates victims and survivors of sex trafficking. Let's talk a little bit about that dynamic, because Anonymous was highlighting the fact that, briefly, she was saying, you know what, at a particular point of day when she was moving around the township, there was a scenario where, she was at a public place, but there wasn't a lot of movement. It seemed like there was not a lot of people in that particular area. The traffickers themselves, do they have an operation that, navigates around public spaces, or is it more in private areas? How does it work? What should people be watching for in terms of public environments or even their private situations?
So kidnapping for ransom is quite high in South Africa. So we know, and just general kidnappings, but many of these women are being kidnapped for being sold into the sex trade. So, and that's where it gets very, very concerning when it is a kidnapping case, because the question is, where is she going? So we've had cases where the victim was kidnapped, and what traffickers do, and this is a global trend, but we've seen it in South Africa, where they will break in a lady for an entire week. So they will kidnap her, drug her, and then what, unfortunately, this is really sad to say, and I don't want to traumatize people, but that breaking means they are raping her continuously for an entire week to break her will,
Wow.
to push her into submission so that she knows who's the boss,
That's
who's in
terrible.
control, so that they can gain, and they want to make money out of it. They want to sell into the sex trade. So yes, the concerning thing is also, South Africa is a destination country. It's a transition country where victims are being transitioned. We've seen children coming into the airport with fake passports being transitioned to other countries, but it's also an exit country where these traffickers are sourcing, because the market, the European market, there's other markets for African girls, and this is why these girls are going out of the country. And the sad thing is, when they exit the country, if South Africa do not have a strong country partnership or relationship with these international other countries, then how do we find that victim again? How do we find, as an NGO, we connect with international NGOs specifically for that reason, because we do have women. Last year, we helped a lady that went to Thailand, South African lady that was lured to Thailand.
Wow.
And one of our NGO partners on that side found her on the street because these traffickers just left her there on the street.
Sure.
And then we managed to integrate her back to South Africa.
Wow, it is so saddening and heart-wrenching indeed in terms of how this unfolds. But let's go to our business news for now, and then we'll come back and speak to Anonymous. I think we have her back on the line, Bali,
Yes,
and
we
then
do.
we'll chat a little bit about her experience after that. It's 11:31 Central African time. We'll be back with this conversation after our business news.
It's every woman's biggest fear, your name, your face being plastered all over social media and TV with the letters and word missing on top of it. It's a reality for many, unfortunately. We still continue this human trafficking for sex trade conversation. In studio still, Emma Van De Walt from Brave to Love, and Anonymous back on the line to relay her story. Anonymous, are you still there? All right. Thank you so much for staying with us and helping us unpack this conversation. So you were telling us from the beginning of your conversation, you were visiting your sister, you were on your way home, and it was around a time where a lot of taxis are not available. And what happens next?
And just imagine just on 5 o'clock during like almost 6 o'clock, it doesn't even dark. So obviously you wake up and to body taxi. So I think those people were probably somewhere around looking at me and looking where I was going, because the car stops. Yes, this is where you're going, right? We also go in that direction, which was like, okay, it's fine. Went to the car. I was offered a face mask. So I was like, okay.
Just say that again. You were offered a face mask.
Yes, the face mask. For, face mask when covered, just after covered. Not everybody, it was still usual that for people to wear face masks. Now I bought a taxi and a car, and okay, fine, here's the face mask, and it was all clean. You can see it just came from the packet. Unfortunately, a few hours, or I don't know how long it was, but then I wake up and I'm in a room, dark room, with a sponge and water. The door's locked. Everything is that. Like, okay, fine. Yeah, what's going on? I'm confused. I'm thirsty. It just goes on like that until some lady comes in with a face mask, comes in with some food, just not food, like just a can of beans. Okay, fine. What's your name? I don't know her name. You better speak up. What's your name? Where do you live? I don't say anything. I don't know her. I'm scared. She gives me food. She comes back. She leaves. It happens like that for a few days. I don't give her my name. I don't want her to know anything about me. Then I became blindfolded at some stage. It was a few days later, and a guy comes in. When the guy comes in, he speaks Nigerian, and I can hear the voices. Okay, fine. And here she is, and you can hear that they're actually telling me I'm on sale. And I'm like, please not do this. I actually have two children, and I'm pregnant, 4 months pregnant. Do not do this to me. He becomes so hysterically angry and caught up. I can hear the voice now. He is mad. Why do you bring such a useless person? This person is useless. No, I can't have this. Think about this. This is zero. This is rubbish. And he leaves. Once he leaves, and now, that's my worst. And I was like, okay, are they going to kill me now? Because I'm so useless to them. I'm worthless to them. So are they going to kill me? Okay. After a few hours, I'm still so that you can hear the movements, like getting inside the cars, and there are so many doors and so many people talking around, and you can hear from all these days I've been there. It was not even only me. I was only the one in the room, but there are so many parts because you can hear so many doors open, the doors open and closing, and by the end, luckily for me, went to throw me away some near the graveyard, and yeah, I was so happy when I heard that car screeching. I just became so relieved when I heard that. Okay, probably I'm alone now. God, I can take off my blindfold, and I did. I ran for my life, went home. That was like very traumatic.
Yeah, it sounds super traumatic. Do you know how many days you were there, and how did that make you feel afterwards? I mean, what were the consequences of that experience?
The consequences of that experience, okay, well, I forgot that I actually broke a window with my leg. I pushed up, break the window, and that and hit me so hard. Like she killed me to the point where I thought maybe she was also going to kill me. That was actually before the stage. And afterwards, the trauma is still haunting me. Like I can't just, I can't move on for the fact that I don't even have any relationship in my life right now. I don't want anybody to come inside my life, or and I just block everything out, and I try to not even think about that day most of the time. Like I blocked it. I don't know how many days because of the dark. I was just like, okay, fine, just determining it's probably the next day now because of never see anything inside, and it's like dark. Oh yeah.
Emma, does that sound unique in any way?
I think we need to firstly just look at the madam, the female that was involved in this whole kidnapping process, because when we look at trafficking, we always think it's the dominant male. But these females are part of the process.
Yeah.
And you trust the female, a lot of times you'll trust the female more, or a child will trust the female, and they use the females, and the females also get paid for that. A lot of times in the sex trade, a lady that have been there for 10 years, that has been so comfortable, these traffickers will then give her more responsibility, where she takes on the madam role, where she does receive the money. We've had a 15-year-old girl that was picked up in her community. She was already in drugs, and the family was involved in that process, and she was taken to a brothel in Vereniging. And there, I mean, at that brothel, the madam was telling her, this is how we list you online on, Sex Trader, or where this is how we list you online. This is how you dress. So the madam is very much involved, and that is the scary part, where these females, I cannot understand. You're a mother. How can you desensitize to trafficked females?
Right. Well, Anonymous, we really thank you for sharing your story with us today. And I don't know, perhaps we should connect you with the likes of Emma afterwards, because, I mean, as you're saying, you are still struggling with the psychological implications of what happened to you. Were there any processes with the police after your return home? Were they followed through with your incident?
After I got home, I really just blocked myself out, and I didn't want to go anywhere. I don't want to see the police. Because anyway, it's like the very same thing once happened to me when I was younger. So, and I just thought, okay, nothing's gonna happen. So as long as I'm home, I'm safe. I don't want to go. I want to involve myself with the police.
Well, Anonymous, your line is breaking again, but thank you so much for your time. It has been, it's really sad to hear your story, but we really hope that you telling your story can touch someone else's life today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, as you heard, Emma, the Anonymous, being the victim in this situation, has no trust for the police. There are incidences, especially, in human trafficking, when we hear stories that sometimes the police are involved, and even when they're not involved, they don't really help the victims as much as they should.
Correct. So we are an NGO that works obviously very closely with police, with law enforcement. They are fantastic specialized units. We work with the NATCHOC, your SAPs that are specialized in human trafficking. But unfortunately, victims have told me that they have been raped by police. The police will come in and book them as girls. Many of my victims, and survivors have told us this, where the police will do their rounds. The local police station in these red light areas will take their 100 rand. Every night they'll do their rounds with all the pimps and 200 rand every pimp, because that protects them, that gives them safety.
Yes.
So corruption is weakening, and this is why I'm so passionate about this, because we need to understand it's not a housebreaking. This is a level 7 crime against a human being, and most victims are vulnerable women and children. Currently in the court, most cases are child trafficking. Children, and I mean, a girl under 18, she's a child. She should not be in a brothel. 14, she should not be in a brothel.
Yeah, you spoke about level 7 crime. Tell us what that means.
So we understand you get level 1 crimes, you get robberies, pickpocketing, those there. But level 7 crime is a high priority crime where as South Africa, we need to fight aggressively. We need to fight with more force against that. It is a human being that we're talking about. How can you put a price tag on a human being? How can a human being be a commodity? It's slavery. We need to fight harder against slavery.
How do we fight against it? What are the systems we can introduce in society, in our policing systems? How do we work alongside NGOs such as yourself to deal with this growing issue?
Correct. So there's a few angles. I call them weapons. And firstly, the media is a weapon. Let's do prevention work. Let's fight by preparing the public, saying this is what to look out for. We do use the human traffic hotline to report trafficking. If you suspect something, say something. The community, the people need to speak. When we look at the system, I do believe, unfortunately, South Africa has been downgraded again on the TIP report, that we're not even getting to the standard norms of what we should do as a country to fight human trafficking. And this is where prevention work in our schools, our teenage girls need to know. A lot of times they runaways or they want to explore, have the big world, find a blesser. That makes them extremely vulnerable for sexual control over them that can go into human trafficking. So our police units needs to be trained. Home Affairs, Department of Health, all these units that are part of government, Department of Social Development, we do not have enough safe houses for women. We do not have enough counseling. We do not have a long-term, I do believe, with Brave to Love Civil Society, yes, partnering with the Department of Social Development, but we need a long-term program. These cases are not getting to court because the victims are scared, and the victims are a lot of time need long-term drug rehabilitation. So the long-term process of at least 3 years where there's trauma counseling, those are very important.
Well, over and above your work at Brave to Love, you're also an author of a book called She Is Safe, which is an expose of the dark world of human trafficking in South Africa. Tell us a bit more about your book before we wrap it up.
Yeah, I think it's very important. The book is available at Exclusive Books, Graffiti Books, Take a Lot, on our website, bravetolove.org. It's available on there, so it's everywhere. It's actually sold out in the first month, but we've reprinted, so you'll be able to find it in store still, but because we've reprinted the book. So the book is firstly educated on human trafficking, but it's the stories of survivors of South African women that happened here in South Africa, how they got out, and some women that have been victim to the system of prostitution, because a lot of times think she's a prostitute, and yes, prostitution should not be legal in South Africa, because the system is breaking down women, and these traffickers are using the brothels to traffic, and these women that are working prostitution are more, it's red flag areas, are more vulnerable to become victims. A lot of women did enter, but the book is available. I think it's a book that every person should read, and it's heartwarming stories. I've written it in a way that's not too traumatizing, so the people, but the stories of these women that cannot voice their own stories are we've given voice to their powerful stories.
Emma, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for the really powerful work that you're doing, because these are instances where most people don't have voices, and you become the voice of those people, but also the help that you offer those victims and survivors is so important. Please continue doing this amazing work, and hopefully we see you as part of the major fight against human trafficking on the continent.
Thank you, Palesa. It's wonderful being here. Thank you for giving voice to these survivors.
That is Emma Van De Walt, founder of NGO Brave to Love and the author of the book She Is Safe. We're speaking about human trafficking and the sex trade. That's how we wrap up not just this conversation, but almost wrap up the hour as well. It's almost 10 to 12 Central Africa time. Let's go back to Fikile Lengwati. He has our latest sports news.